Hello, everyone. Welcome to SpiritCare. As you will know and have heard before, in SpiritCare, it's the goal to make sure we are attending to your spirit, and that's where we believe at SpiritCare. It's where we believe that care for your emotional, mental, and physical well-being begins with care for your spirit. And through these sharings or teachings, as we look into the Bible and share what we're reading, the goal and my desire is to help your spirit grow, thereby also seeing the benefits to your emotional, physical, and mental well-being. So let's go ahead and get started. This is part 2 of what I am calling church infiltration. And hold on one second. I wanted to make sure I didn't do something, so the beep was me timing myself here because there's a lot of meat in here and I want to make sure that we cover a lot. You'll also see I have some other things going on, and so I would like grace if you don't mind. I am trying to make sure I set up everything correctly, and at one point I will have it consistently down and I won't have to kind of keep playing with everything. So where was I? Okay. So what I was pointing at was that when I first started this series and looking at the book of Jude, I thought I would call this church infiltration. But the more I dig into it, I realized it's more than just talking about people intruding or infiltrating the church. It is about contending for the faith. So you'll see the title change where I've said church infiltration, contend for the faith, because that's the direction we're going. That's what we're going to see when we're done. So in part one, we covered Jude 1 through 4. So Jude, 25 chapters, 25 verses altogether. Jude 1 through 4 was what we covered. Today we're going to start at verses 5. We'll see how far we get. I'm watching my time just to make sure I know when to stop. This is part 2. Thank you for joining me. And the other thing I have to tell you is, because I got all this stuff going on, something might happen in the middle, like a light might go out. And you are going to hear some rustling of papers. Again, grace. I appreciate it. So, and a phone might buzz. I'm a Pete. Anyway, Jude 1, 5 through 7. In the World English Bible reads as, "Now I desire to remind you, though you already know this, that the Lord, having saved a people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who didn't believe. Angels who didn't keep their first domain, but deserted their own dwelling place, he has kept in everlasting bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, having the same way as these, given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are shown as an example, suffering the punishment of eternal fire." What is going on in these verses? So this is like a history lesson. It's a reminder of those or what happens to those who deny or rebel against God. And he actually says in that, I think it's in verse 5, where he says, you kind of already know this. You've seen from scriptures what happens when people pervert the grace of God, which we were talking about in Jude 1 through 4. When they rebel against God, there is this sort of outcome. You're fully aware of it. You've heard of it. You've read it in our past history. That's what Jude is explaining to them. And he's reminding of them of generally what they already know is the outcome of incorrect teaching. So there are three examples that he gives them. He starts with the Israelites. So he reminds them that after being saved from 400 years of slavery, the folks in the desert perverted the grace of God by not believing in him and his plan. In fact, at some point, they wanted to go back to their slavery. They were destroyed by 4 decades of wandering until all those believers had died out. And if you know a little bit of history about when they were in the desert trying to go from Egypt to a new land, um, that was like 11-day journey. Don't hold me to that. I feel like it was 11 days. I know it wasn't a month. It was something they could have done really quickly. But God made them wander for 40 years in that desert because of their rebellion. The second example he gives is Sodom. I'm going to make sure I do this. Is angels. I'm sorry. So in angels, he talks about the angels perverting God's grace by not staying in their assigned position, in their assigned place. He talks about a third of them rebelling with Satan. So if you know what we've learned or what we've taught through reading scriptures, Satan was also an angelic being. He, in fact, was a beautiful being, and he was in charge of music, is what we're learning, or what we've learned from scriptures. And in that, he wanted to, I suppose, be like God. He was the one who caused the mess in the garden with Adam and Eve, and causing that disobedience, and even the way he tricked Eve and tricked Adam. Those things, it was like in that rebellion, he was thrown out of the heavenly places. But like all leaders, when you want to do some dirt, you also have some dirt. How should I say this better? When you want to do some dirt, you always have some followers through you in your dirt. And so a third of the angels also rebelled with him. And now those third are in chains and darkness until the time of judgment for all. When God comes back to judge everything. The third example he gives them, sorry, you might have heard a little clicking. The third example he gives them is Sodom and Gomorrah. And most of the times we'll talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, but he reminds us that there were other cities around them. So they were not the only one who received this punishment. Sodom and Gomorrah and all the other cities around them, they perverted God's grace through rampant sexual immorality, and they were all later destroyed. In this history lesson, Jude reminds them that God does not like the perversion of his grace through false teachings, through ignoring and not being obedient. He just doesn't like that. And there is a consequence. Paper shuffling as I go to the next verse. So I am now in Jude 1:8. In Jude 1:8 of the World English Bible, it reads as such: Yet, in the same way, these also in their dreaming defile the flesh, despise authority, and slander celestial beings. Jude is now looking at how the infiltrators are behaving. How are these false teachers behaving? He refers to it as in their dreaming. Now, he didn't say this, but I was like in their scheming, But he says in their dreaming, which is really referring to their claim of having these visions or dreams that gives them this sense of authority. He refers back to how those three examples he gave beforehand, how they play out here in their behavior. So like the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, who defiled their flesh with their rampant sexual activities, this is most likely what these false teachers, these infiltrators are doing. They're most likely practicing some sort of sexual immorality. He talks about the unbelieving Israelites, right? And like those unbelieving Israelites who defied authority, these false teachers are rejecting God's authority, and probably the authority of some of the leaders in that church where they were. Remember, we talked about this didn't seem to be directed to any one church, so it may have been a rampant problem. So they're defying the authority of whatever church they're in. And then lastly, on top of all of this, they were speaking bad about celestial beings, and that's angels. Probably angels, saying that they were speaking disrespectfully of angels or demons or maybe even God's spiritual order, as if they were greater than any of this. And they, again, had some sort of authority that they could speak like this about celestial beings. So these people claim to have this authority and with their teaching, and yet they live their lives opposite of God's instruction manual. For us, we know it as the Bible. At the time when Jude wrote this, he didn't have the Bible. He had scriptures, and he had these teachings that reminded him of what God wanted us to do. And these infiltrators were living opposite of this. We're going to go to Jude 1:9. But Michael, so I want to tell you, this is in reference to the last part of Jude 1:8. So when we talk about slander celestial beings, in Jude 1:9, he gives an example of how what they're doing is not right. So in Jude 1:9, he says, but Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil and arguing about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him an abusive condemnation, but said, may the Lord rebuke you. I think I got to say that I think I got to say that again. Moses, but dared not bring against him Satan. So Michael didn't dare to bring against Satan an abusive condemnation, but he said to him instead, may the Lord rebuke you. This verse seemed, as I said, this verse is connecting to the last part of verse 8. And Satan himself is considered a supernatural being. So even Michael, the head angel in the heavens, knew not to say anything slanderous or use any type of abusive language or abusive condemnation about the celestial beings. He even knew that. Enough to know not to say anything to Satan as he's fighting with him over Moses' body. Yet these teachers are doing this. Sorry, flip another page. Jude 1:10. So in Jude 1:10, we see that what the teaching of these people is like. So in Jude 1:10, Jude says, but these, referring to these infiltrators, speak evil of whatever things they don't know. They are destroyed in these things that they understand naturally, like creatures without reason. The good thing I like about as Jude is going through, he gives a lot of similes to kind of give you a graphic, a visual image of what it's like and how these people are behaving. So the infiltrators seem to be speaking evil about things they know nothing about. They take their natural reasoning, and we've seen people do it. They'll take a natural reasoning of something, a natural understanding of something, and speak about it as if it has a spiritual matter, and that's what they will do. He tells us that this is going to destroy them. And Jude refers to them as animals who move more by instinct, rather than moving by instinct, like does it feel good, rather than by reason, is it good? As I went through this so far, you may have gotten somebody in your head, and I would encourage you at the moment to pray for them. Okay, we're going to talk later on about how you deal with them, and especially in your own spirit and in your relationship with them. But at this moment, if someone came to your mind, just pray for them. Jude 1:11. I'm checking my time, and I think that we can do Jude 1:11. I think we can do Jude 1:11. And then pause for part 3. So in Jude 1:11, he says, woe to them, for they, those infiltrators, for they went in the way of Cain and ran riotously in the era of Balaam for hire and perished in Korah's rebellion. He is sort of giving this summary, and he starts with this pity statement, woe to them, like this pity or like saying sorrow on them for what they are doing. Because in summary, their behavior is like that of Cain, who chose to rebel against God by murdering his brother. They are like Balaam. If you know anything about Balaam, he was a prophet. And he chose to do opposite of what God told him to do by hiring his gift of prophecy out for money. And they, like, and at this point, I think we're talking about their character, right? This is what their character is like. Finally, the infiltrators will also perish. So he's talking about their character, behavior, and what will be the outcome for them. Finally, the infiltrators will perish like Korah, who was in the desert with Moses. And he rebelled, like when they were traveling through the desert, he was one of those people who rebelled against Moses' leadership. And as a result, his entire family was swallowed up in what looked like an earthquake, or sounds. When you read it, it seems like it was an earthquake. His entire family. Woe or pity or sorrow to these infiltrators. I am pausing because part of me is like, could I eke out one more verse? I might be getting a little greedy, and could I eke out one more verse? I'm going to see if I can. If it doesn't work well, it works. If it does work well, it does. Um, I don't think it's going to work well. The next one is pretty big, and I want us to really spend some time on it. So, yeah, this one's pretty big. So, we're going to pause there, right? That is part 2 of Church Infiltration, Contend for the Faith. In between now and the next one, I'd like you to go read verses 1 to 11 on your own. Reflect on some of the things that you're reading. Like I said, if someone came to mind, start praying for them. That's the hardest thing, especially if you feel a certain way, like, well, why are you doing this? You're hurting us. But I remember Jesus said to pray for your enemy, and they may not necessarily be an outright enemy, but if he's asking us to pray for them and to treat our enemy a certain way, somewhere between someone who's a good friend and someone who's an enemy, you still gotta pray and treat them a certain way. In the meantime, I want to thank you for just listening to me and for sharing this time with me. I'll see you back for part 3. Have a great day. Hi. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and or share.